Welcome to the Champion Circle. We are very happy to be here today on another adventure of highlighting and showcasing amazing individuals from our community that are making a difference and that have great stories to tell. I want to thank Liga de Justicia Abogados, Liga de Justicia Foundation, and all of our viewers, all of the past podcasts of focused individuals that we've highlighted on our show, as well as all of the folks who have actually responded to the great stories that have been told. Today is like no other day, or it's actually just like all the other days that we've had on the Champion Circle podcast, in that we're highlighting another extraordinary individual that really makes a difference. Someone who inspires me, someone who I believe is a great dad, a great community activist, and most importantly, just a great human being who I consider a friend. So I want to welcome none other than Jason Richberg.
Hi, Mark. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to the Champion Circle for this conversation.
Awesome. So be ready to talk about your life. I want you to know that I think sharing your life experience can be inspirational to so many young people, so many older people, and can really help our community understand where you come from and how similar they are to you, perhaps in their journey or in their philosophy. So let's go back to the beginning, Jason. Let's talk about where were you born? Talk to us about your youth, about your family, about your environment at home, your culture, the foundation of what made you you.
So I was born, and thank you again. So I was born in Rosedale. I was actually born in Maimonides Hospital in Brooklyn. I spent my first 5 years in Rosedale. My mother worked for the Transit Authority for her whole career. She started when she was 16.
Really?
Yeah, she worked for the Transit Authority in communications. Literally, she got her internship there, and she never left.
Wow.
And my father used to work in radio for a little bit. He was an accountant for a radio station, and then he got a job in the Inspector General's office for the federal government, focused in the EPA. And my grandfather was an attorney, and he worked for the Division of Human Rights and the city of New York for a little bit as well. And my grandmother worked for what is now Verizon. So we always had conversations about government and politics and pensions and how policies are affecting our daily lives. And so as a kid, I went to St. Joseph's Episcopal Day School for the first year or 2 years of my life. And then we moved out to North Babylon. With hopes of being closer to my grandparents. We actually moved a block away from my grandparents. But right after we signed the purchase of the house, my grandmother passed away right then. Or very close to that time. But it was, we're a very small family, right? My father's sibling lives in California. My mother didn't have siblings, which is very different for that age group. And so it's really us and my grandfather. My father has a sister, but they're sort of estranged, so they never really talked. And so from there, I went to Episcopal school for the first 4 years, I guess, of my life. Went to Catholic school, and then in the meantime, they found out that I had a learning disability. They tried to diagnose me with a number of different things. They told my mother that I would never be successful, that I'd live in her basement for the rest of my life. And she'd be responsible for taking care of me. I guess in some ways she'll probably say she still is, right? If you're a parent, you know what that's like. Like, no matter what, you're going to be responsible. From there, I went to North Babylon schools, graduated from North Babylon.
All right, let's slow down a little bit.
I know, I'll give you a little bit of everything.
You're going a little too fast. I'm trying to get some more foundation here, right? To what made you you. Now, your parents' background, their ancestry or your ancestry, where does it come from?
So my maternal grandmother, was one of the Jackson Whites from New Jersey. So those are the fairer-skinned folks who immigrated from the South. My grandfather.
What part of the South did they come from?
They came from, I believe, I don't remember, but they
Right.
also had Native American
Right.
ancestry as well.
Right.
And my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, he's actually first generation from Jamaica and St. Martin.
Okay.
So his parents came in through Ellis Island. They signed the book. They came in with literally a mink coat and a dream.
Interesting.
So my great grandmother, she owned a store in Brooklyn, in between an Italian butcher and a German baker. This West Indian woman had a store, and they sort of had their own little network. And so one of the things my grandfather did as a living is that he would go, his responsibility was paid, like I think it was a nickel or maybe a little less, to go to both stores in the morning and read the newspaper to the two other shop owners, because that was in the middle of World War II. And, they wanted to know what was going on in World War II. And at the same time as he was doing that, his brothers were fighting in World War II.
Interesting. Okay.
And we can talk about my father's family. I know you're going to have some more questions.
No. Tell me about that.
So my father's family, my father would have told you that he's American black.
Right.
Right. He's just, slave ancestry. From the Carolinas. In fact, we were down in North Carolina and we found a place called Richbergville, and we realized that that's where our ancestry came from.
Okay.
And they moved up to New York. They lived in Harlem. My father, for his whole life, he had a family church that they went to, Mount Zion in Harlem.
Right.
He went there up until the day he died. He would go drive back and forth to Harlem. It didn't matter where he was. They moved to New Jersey. Spent time in Jersey where he graduated high school. He served in Vietnam, and he and my mom met. My mom was, just started being an intern. My mom graduated high school at 16, so they met around 17, 18. When she was 18, I think he had just gotten out the service at the time.
Mm-hmm. Have you been to Ellis Island? Have you found your...
So it's funny. My sons were. I haven't been there in years.
Okay.
But my sons were there a couple of weeks ago, and I said to them, your great grandparents were there, so I'm going to take them back, and so because you could pull,
right, you can do
pull
a search.
You could pull the sheets
Yeah.
with the original name. So
Interesting. Okay. All right. So now, your family moves and purchases a home in Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
How diverse do you know? Have your parents ever talked about the fact that they bought a home in an area that maybe?
So before that, right, my grandfather moved to the North Babylon area in the 60s.
Okay.
He actually bought the house without talking to my grandmother. You did things like that back then. You can't do that now. You might get found on the side of the road. You start buying property.
Exactly.
But he bought the property in North Babylon then, and it's one of the oldest black communities on the island. Short of Southampton, Sag Harbor, and Gordon Heights. This was one of the other black enclaves. I think it's the oldest black civic, founded in 1956. And so they had been used to the neighborhood. My mother, when she graduated high school, there was only 17 black students in the class. When I graduated, I think we were about, maybe about 40%, 50%. Now, North Babylon, my sons go to the same school district that I graduated from, my mother graduated from. It's 30% black, 30% Hispanic, and about 30% white. Mm-hmm. And so it's a really, really diverse community, and it's gotten more and more diverse as we go. My neighbors, I have neighbors who are Southeast Asian, I have neighbors who are Hispanic, I have neighbors who are black, and it's a melting pot. And it's one of those neighborhoods where, if you got off the bus at the wrong place, somebody's calling your mother and say, hey, look, we got him. Yeah, we got him.
Okay. All right. Awesome. All right. So you start going to school, to grammar school, and then I guess middle school, etc. Talk to me about you were told, I guess, at one point that you might be a burden, but I'm sure you became a little better with your grades, with the academics. So talk to us about your academic journey.
I will say, one of the things I have is fine motor difficulty. So if you ever see me handwriting, it's horrible. And I think, transferring from an Episcopal school to a Catholic school, there was a lot of questions. In the Episcopal Church, we have a different, religious philosophy, right? And I'm known to ask questions. I asked questions of the priests when we went to and the nuns when we went to Catholic school. They was like, well, you got to do the Hail Mary. I said, why I got to do that? Why can't I just pray straight to Jesus?
Right.
I spent the last 4 years going this way. And so that probably helped me to figure out where I need to be going to school. But going to elementary school and middle school, and I was sort of behind, right? So because most of these kids have been together for about 4 or 5 years by that point. And I'm, the super kid coming out. I went to private school. I didn't go to the same elementary schools right away. So it was a little different. It was a bit of adjustment. And it took me a while to sort of find my place or not find my place and figure out what motivated me. And so I got involved with stuff with my church. We worked with our youth group in church. I worked at a summer camp. I ended up being really involved with our diocesan youth group, the Episcopal Diocese of Long Island youth group. And I got sort of involved with church politics, I guess you could say. And politics was always important in our house anyway. So it was important to see my grandfather was on the board of the church, my mother was on the board of the church at the time, and my father was on the board. So we've always had a sense of service in our family, which was important.
Okay. High school. Talk to us about your high school years and.
So a joke is, and in
I'm scared to ask
high
that
school,
question.
I wore a suit.
Okay.
So, and a story that having to do with that is, not the gym, obviously, but, so my father, I remember we went to this trip, he was working, and he went to Tennessee, we were in Tennessee, and my father would always, no matter where he went, he always dressed up, and I talked to him, I said, Daddy, come on, you're like a nerd, come on, let's not do that. And so the one time, I remember we went to Tower Records somewhere in Tennessee, and he got stopped by the cops in the mall. And he said, you see, when I dress like this, right, I'm treated differently.
Right.
But when I was dressed, and my father, he was wearing, he had jeans, but they were not, he didn't have sagging jeans or anything like that. I think he had like a bright white Nike volleyball shirt. Like it wasn't, granted it was the 90s, so everything was bright neon colored. And so he said, I have to dress like I'm going to work.
Right.
And I sort of internalized that in high school and saying that I have to be professional. And I might not know what I want to do, but I know I got to be professional. So I started wearing a suit.
Okay.
And that sort of changed my perspective going forward.
All right, that's interesting. Now, when you bring that up, I always tend to start thinking about, and my father, as an African American man, he was like your dad. He dressed up all the time. I don't remember him wearing sneakers until he had like reunions when they played softball, right? Like they had those reunions back in the Bronx or what have you. So I always wonder, why didn't our parents talk to us about their civil rights struggles? Did your father ever talk to you about the struggles that he lived through or the civil rights struggles? Because my father never did.
So my father never really talked about his struggles in Vietnam and coming back home from that. And it's interesting because we never had a flag in front of our house until after he died.
Right.
And he didn't want a military funeral or anything. And he was active in I don't want to say in the Black Power in the Black Power movement, but also in the ancillary movements as well. He believed in making sure that we invest in ourselves. He coached basketball for most of his life. Right. He coached basketball in Queens. Some of his guys made it to the NBA. Right. Some of them made it as NBA coaches, and some of them made it in professional circuits. But his main focus was not they were very focused on history. So when we would take a trip, we'd have to go, depending on where we were, you'd have to go to a museum. If we were in the South, you had to find a local plantation. We had to have the conversation about the Civil War
Right.
and what was it fought about. And we had conversations about scientists and other things that black people do other than sports, and people of color. He was my father and my mother, but my father was very focused on us understanding that there's different ways of looking at things, right? And because you listen to bachata, that doesn't mean that that's the only type of music, right? He says there's jazz. He says, and I remember having this conversation with him about religion, and I said, well, how do you marry up religion and music? He says, well, listen, God speaks to different people in different ways, right? Mm-hmm. And so that means you can express yourself in different ways too. But he always went back to the fact that you have to give back to raise somebody else up. The fact that you have something, your goal is to bring somebody else up. Mm. And that's how he really expressed his civil rights conversation. And, we always had, to be fair, we had those civil rights conversations at our house all the time. My grandfather was a regional director, Division of Human Rights. So he would talk about how important it is to have those rights. But my father's perspective was, how do we ensure that other people have those rights? Is you give back and you let them see an option.
Right. But at the same time, not bringing up, like, so many of our veterans come back and they don't want to share those goals, right? Mm-hmm. And then so many of our civil rights pioneers, don't want to share those bad experiences, right? So they try to inspire and motivate to do right.
Yeah, and I guess his other part in that was, I struggled so you wouldn't have to.
Correct.
But understand that this is where you came from. Right. So, like, we had to go see the Sweatbox, right? You had to go see, when we went down to Nashville. We went to see where Martin Luther King was shot, right? When we went to, on the other side, when we went down to Texas, right? We had to go to the book depository to see where they shot John F. Kennedy, right? And the conversation was, these folks, and we had to watch the Malcolm X movie, right? And then we had to have a conversation about Black Power and what that actually meant, and how there's more than one way to attack a problem. And that's how, my parents focus on the fact that you don't have to do it my way, but figure out a way that works best for you. And sometimes I'm more like my father, and sometimes I'm more like my mother. It depends on the day.
Okay, so perfect blend. So you get through high school, and what's your next chapter? What do you decide to do? What are you aspiring to become?
So I got to high school. In high school, I was taking aviation, so I was learning how to fly planes. And I said I'm going to go to Farmingdale for a semester or 2 semesters. I'm going to try and get to the Naval Academy because Top Gun was my movie. I wanted to fly. I wanted to take off. Tom Cruise.
Go ahead, Maverick.
Right. Okay. I had to have a flight jacket. I saw all the stuff. We had met with the guy from the Naval Academy. They said you could transfer in all the stuff. And so in 2001, and so to be fair, back then, we flew over LaGuardia and JFK in a little airplane from Farmingdale, and we flew around the towers, like all this stuff, right? We flew down around in New York City, off the tip of Manhattan, and then 9/11 happened. And so my father's office, he wasn't there because it was a primary day, so he always worked he always did the elections. But his coworker saw, I don't remember if it was the first plane or the second plane hit, because the window was right there. And my father said, that's it. No, we're not doing any military, nothing. And it was really a reaction to his experience in Vietnam. Right. And he saw that he's like, and we're not doing any protests. You're going to stay here. You want to protest? You protest right here in my living room. That's where you can protest. And that's sort of, and so I was ready to start flying again. I mean, it was a lot of money. It's still a lot of money to learn how to fly. but I was ready to do it, and it sort of pulled the wind from beneath my wings, for lack of a better. So then I left Farmingdale, and I went to SUNY Westbury. Went back coaching swimming. I met a strong Russian coach, Siggy, who got me back into swimming. I swam, my whole life up until like 18, up until I graduated high school. And so I got back into swimming. I got into coaching. I loved coaching. I love like the mentorship and talking, getting people through problems. But SUNY Farmingdale, SUNY Westbury weren't really right for me. And I took a semester off, or a couple. I should say my grandfather got into a car accident while I was in Farmingdale too, after 9/11. And so I ended up failing a semester because he had 8 brain surgeries between 2001 and 2003. So he ended up with 8. And so he had a shunt put in his head, pumping water. He had hydrocephalus, which is water in the brain. But, I went to the rehab where he was, and they hadn't fed him. His teeth weren't in, all types of stuff. So I made the conscious decision that I now need to help take care of him. Mm-hmm. My professors didn't believe me. They thought I was fooling around. And later on, must have been 2005, my mother works with someone who went to Wilberforce University, which is a small historically private university in Ohio. And they said, listen, I know your son wants to get back into school. There might be a scholarship. And do you want to apply? And I said, sure, I'll apply. And figuring I'll go in January of 2006. And so I applied, and they got back to me within like 5 days, maybe a week. I said, yeah, so you have to be out here in 2 weeks. Which I wasn't expecting, right? And so I had a conversation with my boss, my swim coach at the time. I said, hey, I got into the school. I don't know what I'm doing. And he fired me on the spot. He said, you're fired. He wrote out the last check. He said, this is your check. There should be, and it was, it was a little bit more than I probably would have deserved.
Severance pay in there.
Right. Well, he said, this is for you to get started in school. He said, I'm not going to hold you back.
Right. Good for him.
Right. And he didn't have to do that. Like he could have. Right. And we were a small team, and he probably needed all the coaches he could. But he said, no, you're fired. Yeah. And he was an old school Russian. He swam for the Russian national team. He was supposed to be in the Olympics when the Russians, boycotted the Olympics. Yeah. So he understood like this was an opportunity to change my life. And it did. Right.
Those are some of those angels that we need in our lives that really help kind of us to either pivot or just make, take a different road to kind of change our total kind of
and push you in
journey.
And sometimes push you.
Correct. That's awesome. All right, so you get to Ohio and talk to us about how that experience is.
Ohio was a different world. I can't explain it.
That's a nice way of putting it.
It was a different world, right? So we were the school was in the middle of farmland, right? There's like cornfields around. Right. There's tornadoes.
Right. What's the closest major city to the school?
Dayton was about 30 minutes away. Right. Columbus was about an hour away, and Cincinnati was about an hour and a half. Right. So we're in the southwest corner. Yep. But it's not New York. And the one thing I woke up, I was like, I can't smell the ocean. Right. Like that's one of those things like you take for granted here. But it was probably the best experience I ever had because it forced me to be different. Like when you're home, you have sort of like a cushion, right? Right. I didn't have a cushion. Like I had to go out.
No
parachute. I had to figure out, like I had to get up, go to class. There was no one to wake me up. Right, I had my own room. I was an older student, but I still had to get focused, right? And I had some really good professors. The vice president of institutional advancement mentored me. Was another one of those angels who pushed me in the right direction. Found internships for me. Found fellowships and got me directed. My political science professor was, he was a no BS person. He's the first person who told me if you give me more than a page in an assignment, I know you're lying, right? And that taught me to be concise. Mm-hmm. And it was a great opportunity. I got to see how different we all are. Like I met black people from Alaska. I know it sounds crazy, but like meeting people and different music that we all listen to and the different cultures, how different we all are amongst ourselves, but united is really important.
Okay. Did you get involved with any student organizations, any extracurricular activities?
That's a little bit. So I joined Kappa Alpha Psi, Delta chapter. While they
tell some of our folks what Kappa Alpha Psi is.
Well, it's the best fraternity in the world. So I mean, if you don't know, so Kappa Alpha Psi is one of the 9 Black Greek letter organizations that we have, called the Divine Nine. It was founded at Indiana University, and Wilberforce University is the 4th collegiate chapter to be founded in the nation. And it was good to hear it history, but also understand how it took part in the civil rights movement. And, you know, that changed my life too, meeting brothers from all different walks of life and going to conferences. And I can go in almost any room, and whether it's the Divine Nine connection or the HBCU connection, it's a different world, it's a different network, and we all have common themes and common background.
Now, when I think about raising my daughter, right? When I applied to law school, I applied to several law schools from HBCUs. I wound up going to Nebraska, so very similar to Ohio. It was a similar experience. It was cornfields
and that wind, that cold wind hit you.
Cold wind and tornadoes and craziness, right? But oftentimes I think about, okay, so someone like yourself who went to an HBCU, who obviously, you know, pledged and is a member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, what do you see for your sons? Do you see you encouraging that path, or do you see you allowing them to kind of take their own path? You know, how do you see you guiding them?
So I'll say that the only way I can describe going to an HBCU is, you know, when you're in the shower and you're nice, warm, and comfortable, right? That's what it's like going to a HBCU, because you're surrounded by culture and environment and support. And you know, when you get out the shower and that cold air hits you, right? Yeah. That cold air is the real world, right? And I will just say that when we left the Wilberforce campus, like when I went to the airport to fly home, that cold air hit you, right? Because you realize, oh, wow, Wilberforce is not the real, quote-unquote, real world. But it also arms you with things, you know, co-op classes and different professors. And so I would want my sons to engage in the HBCU life, especially in this day and age where we see folks attacking, quote-unquote, DEI, and not understanding that cultural investment is important. Right? It's important to understand from the Irish perspective, from the Italian immigrant perspective, from the Jewish perspective, from the Muslim perspective, from the Black perspective, from the Hispanic perspective, from the South. All those perspectives are important, right? Robbing ourselves of it doesn't help us as a community, as a culture, as a world. So I would want them to embrace it. And I bring them around. We have our Kappa League. My sons come with me, right? Because it doesn't, you know, your mentorship of your sons, your daughters, it starts now, right? And so, like, with your daughter, the number one thing is, you know, surround her with positive men and women who she could reach out to, because you need somebody to be a parent when you can't be the parent. Right? There's a point in time where your daughter is going to be upset and she feels she can't reach out to you. Does she have someone to reach out to who will say, hey, look, Mark, you might want to call her now.
Right.
Or, hey, you know, she called me. She's upset. Don't call her yet. Call her tomorrow.
Right. Makes sense.
And that's what I want for my sons, and that's what I try and surround them with.
Okay. All right. So you wind up graduating, and what is your goal once you graduate?
So when I was in one of the things I wanted to do was be a chief of staff.
Okay.
And so because I saw The West Wing and I loved that.
Right.
Ryan, the chief of staff on The West Wing, I loved the role, And
So we went from Top Gun to West Wing.
well, look, man, my father said I can't fly, so this is what we got, right?
Okay, all right, go ahead.
So I sent my resume out to every Democrat elected official I could to get an interview, and I didn't really get anything. So I came back home, and my father said, "Look, you can't sit at home and do nothing, so you got to figure out something." So I started working around the corner here when Mutual of Omaha was here as an intern in human resources. My job was to find people to be insurance agents. I then was teaching swimming at Safety Swim, and I worked from 9 to 3, and then from 3 to 5, 3 to 7, 3 to 5, I taught swimming in the pool.
That's awesome. I could definitely see you at Safety Swim, too.
Look, and then I coached swimming from 5 to 8.
Right.
And then I helped with the college team for a little bit too. So I was, I left at 8 something in the morning. I'd come home 9, 10 o'clock at night, and I just kept myself moving. And all my hairs or on my arm were blonde. I could, if any set of my clothes smelled like chlorine. And I would change, like driving from here. Not, hopefully there's no police officers. I don't know if the statute of limitations is up, but I would change, like literally, in a bathroom or in the car on my way, because I have to be in the water at a certain time. Right. So 3:30 I had to be in the water. I had to be ready, and then I had to have my coaching stuff ready as well. And then I got an opportunity to interview for a position with the county for the Board of Elections. They said they liked me, but they liked me for a different position. And my father was like, "You're not getting this job." He's like, "Listen, no one gave you an offer. No one said anything. You didn't sign any paperwork. You still working at these other jobs. You can't live at and you got to pay these bills. Right. These bills here at the house have to be paid. Right. And so I don't care how you figure it out, but it better be legal, and you got to pay these bills." And so long story short, I ended up interviewing, and then they said, "Hey, well, what do you think about being a chief of staff?" And then that's the job, chief of staff. I don't want to make any. I could sit in a meeting and not be, the person who's elected makes the real decisions, and I just enforce whatever they're saying or their thought process. And I jumped at it. I didn't get hired right away. They said there was some other stuff that had to be done first. And my father said again, "You didn't get this job. Keep going to work, right? You can't quit anything." Right. I ended up going back to my swim coach too, just so you know. And then I got the job with Dwayne. And I had to quit the insurance agency, and they couldn't believe that I was getting this opportunity. They couldn't believe that I could leave them and now get a full-time job somewhere else. They wanted me to sell insurance, and it was one of those things. It was interesting because when I left there, I had a supervisor who was a real stickler for time. But as I said to you, I had to leave because I had to go to my other jobs. And so I had to check in with my supervisor each and every time I was leaving. There was one time my supervisor was behind closed doors, and I got clients waiting for, and I left a note saying left at whatever time. I think it was 3:15. And I waited 15 minutes longer than I was supposed to. And she sent me an email saying that was unacceptable and I need to reach out to her and talk to her before I leave. And I said, well, with all due respect, my other job, I have other commitments with people who are paying me as well. So how do I balance these two? How do I balance these two commitments? And their response was, "That's not my problem. That's your problem to figure out." And in my mind, I was like, well, once I get this okay to work for Dwayne, I'm out of here. Right. Like, I'm not even... Right. And I think it was an important lesson. I kept that Post-it note for about 10 years to understand...
A badge of honor, right? And motivation.
Well, also, I don't want to treat my staff that way.
Right.
And my swim coach, it was such an interesting dichotomy because he was a person who said, if you need something, Mark, I got it. You want to go out to eat? If we go out to eat and you work for him, you're not paying. If you reach your hand in your pocket, that was an insult to him. Right. And it was a different type of response.
Interesting. Okay. Why did you like coaching so much? What about coaching really feeds your spirit and your soul?
You know what? it's I coached swimming for a number of years. I coached basketball. We had opportunity to have a basketball league in Wyandanch. I coached those kids for about a year after, or a couple months after. And then we started our youth caucus. It's the ability to inspire somebody else and seeing them rise up. I had folks who were national level swimmers. Some of my swimmers end up coaching other places. But it's seeing it's always cool to see somebody connect the dots after something you said, and it's I guess it's a cool way to invest in someone else.
That's awesome. So, what did you like about working for Dwayne? And when you started that job, did you envision yourself becoming an elected official maybe in the future?
I will just say that the first thing I'll say, it's hard to understand somebody else's patterns, right? And it took me a while to adjust to Dwayne's patterns, not in a negative way. It's just that as a young person, you have to figure out how your boss works and how you can support them, right? How do you use your voice for them?
Right.
And especially in government, I think that's important. I didn't really see myself running for office. I mean, other people said that. I just felt like I needed to be there for the community, and that was my job. And I will say that having Dwayne as a supervisor and a boss and a friend was important because he never shied away from putting you in a position for you to succeed, right? He would send me to meetings and say, listen, you represent me, right? You need on your email, put chief of staff. That's your role. Embrace your role. He wasn't a loud voice, but he was a calming voice to say, you belong here, and I believe in you, and this is how we go forward.
That support meant a lot to you then, obviously.
It did, because I wouldn't be here without that support.
Right. And what were the greatest takeaways that you had from that experience?
I think the best lesson he said is you have to lead your own way. You can't lead like me. And what I learned, and whether it's him or I had another boss, Tim Lauby, when I became the chief deputy clerk, who really valued personal relationships in the office, and another boss, Laura Gellerstein, and she was more focusing on adding to your toolbox. Like, what can you learn here to make you better? And that, between those three folks and my swim coach and my parents, right? It was able to give me I had different ways of looking at, I had a book that I could sort of figure out, all right, how do I run this situation? And it helped me to find my own voice. But also all of those people in their own way knew how to kick me to be my best self, right? When I get angry, I learned from Laura and Dwayne that I can't go to them with just a problem. I have to go to them with a problem and at least 2 or 3 solutions. And whichever solution I thought was the best, that's fine. But at least go to somebody with a solution, not just a problem. With Tim, as I said, family dynamics, making sure when you work with people that they feel that you're invested in them. When you get to the office, you circle around, you talk to them, you get your coffee. You can't sit at your desk. Your job, he said, your job is not to sit at your desk. If you're sitting at your desk, you're not doing the right thing. And Siggy, the same, I have to take care of you. I have to be invested in you. Again, that same perspective. And then my father and my mother's perspective of giving back to your community, right? All of those shaped me into who I am.
Now, how was your personal life advancing at this time? Were you already in a relationship, soon to be married?
No, I was dating, and
Okay.
I was, and then I had gotten married in 2015, and we have 2 beautiful children, but I think, and our relationships, the most important relationship I have is my kids, right? And it's not because it's my legacy; it's because I owe them to grow, right? I owe them to be like, that's my number one mentorship. My 4 hours a day that I get to see them because of work and they're in school and all that stuff is about mentorship. Like, what tools am I giving them?
Mm-hmm. All right. So in that role, you kind of jump into a another role after your chief of staff role. You mentioned.
Yeah, I was a chief deputy clerk for
Right.
about a year and a month, and then I became clerk of the legislature. So I was the first African American clerk of the Suffolk County Legislature. And so the legislature dates back to the Board of Supervisors, which dates back prior to the founding of the country.
So repeat that one more time, Jason. You were
So,
the first.
The first African American clerk of the Suffolk County Legislature.
And what year was that?
2015.
All right, I'm just gonna move on to the next.
Well, I was the first, but
Right.
I mean, I think one of the things, and I'll say, Risco mentioned, Lewis says, it's not about being the first; it's
Right.
about making sure you're not the last.
Correct.
Right, and how are we putting people in position to do that. And so, in those roles, I was able to create a PAGE program, an internship program, to bring more people into government. Right, not just on the Democratic side, but the Republican
Sure.
side. I think we have enough. I think we have brought so many folks into government through that program. We had kids balancing a $3.5 billion budget in college and high school.
Right.
And I think it was good work. We set up a mentoring program, a youth caucus in the district office as well, and that's been going on for about 10 years. And again, it's about mentoring. It's another way of coaching.
Okay. So those are great accomplishments. So talk to us about the next step and how those decisions came about.
So in 2019, after the 2019 election, some of my bosses, Laura Gellerstein, one of them, and a couple of my friends and coworkers got together and said, "So Jason, what are you doing? You know, Dwayne's term limited out. Do you want to run for the seat?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I'm thinking about it." And so they called me and they said, "You know, we're going out to lunch. Meet us here at a diner." And I go to this diner, and it's more. I thought it was like one or two people. No, it was like 8 people, and it was basically like
It was like an intervention.
It was an intervention. Like it was like, hey, this is so we're ready. You just have to say yes or no, and the answer is yes. And so I was geared up to run in what would have been the 21 election. And then a couple of weeks later, Dwayne announces that he's going to resign from the legislature. And so I was, I had already met and said, hey, look, I'm interested in running in 21, when Dwayne is termed out and blah, blah, blah. And, come to find out he's not running. He's leaving the legislature. And so that meant I was running in a special. So I got elected on March 10th, 2020. And was sworn in on March 16th, 2020.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. But the most we were hugging and high fiving, and then I got sworn in COVID.
Right.
So the world shut down like the day before.
Right.
And I was in the middle of my master's program. People always joke, "Oh, aren't you happy you want to do this?" And no, the day Dwayne announced that he was going to resign, I had a paper due that Thursday night at midnight. So I know I don't want to talk to people. I don't want to have fun. I got work to do. I'm supposed to go home and, and do papers. And so I ended up getting my master's and getting elected. And it was everything that I thought I'd be doing prior was not a focus because we had to do with social equity. We had to do with health equity. We were in the middle of a pandemic that no one had been in 100 years. There was no real playbook on a county level for that. But luckily, I had great partners in the county executive's office, especially with Vanessa Baird Streeter and Lisa Black and a number of other folks and Dr. Piggott, who's the health commissioner now and then. But it was, and we had social unrest. We all we all embraced. I don't want to say embraced. We all saw George Floyd get murdered in front of our faces.
Yeah.
And that started a real social conversation. Yeah. And I was able to be on the forefront of that, crisis management, and it's been a whirlwind. To think about the things I've done just in 5 years, it's been an amazing trip. I wouldn't change it for anything.
Now, I admire, I think it takes so much courage to be able to put yourself up for scrutiny and to put yourself up for the accountability and responsibility that elected officials have. When you had this intervention and then you finally said yes, you acquiesced, or you agreed that maybe this was your calling. What did you feel at that moment before you were elected? Were you scared? Did you feel overwhelmed? Did you feel underqualified? Tell us what you felt during that process of getting to the election.
So it doesn't matter how many people tell you don't worry about it. You're still going to worry.
Right.
And there's nothing more humbling than having to ask for someone to believe in you who has no reason to believe in you. Right? And I'm not, even though my line name is Confidence and I have confidence, right? I'm not so cocky to think that it's just automatic.
Right.
Right? And that's why I believe in having conversations. Because in those conversations, it gave me more confidence, right? Learning what people need, what's going on, how people really feel. And each time, whether I'm walking for myself, and I knocked on doors for other people, but it's different knocking on doors for yourself.
Sure.
Right? It's different saying, hey, look, I want to have this role. It's different. It was when I wanted to be the clerk and I had to talk to all the legislators and sit down and, try and build, folks who want. It's different. It's different when it's you. And sometimes it's lonely, especially sometimes being an elected official is lonely, right? Because not everybody understands what you go through. Not everybody understands. And I it's funny because I could think about the conversations that Dwayne and I had when he was the presiding officer. He's a town councilman now, and now I get it more. And I remember saying it to him. I said, I understand you more and more every day.
Right.
And it has nothing to do with it's just something he said in passing. Like, why did he say that? Oh, 5 years later, I know exactly why he said that.
Right. Awesome. All right. So talk to us about now you're in this role. Talk to us about some of the hurdles, some of the challenges, some of the accomplishments that have come about because of your participation, because of your endorsement, some of the things you're proud about.
I mean, I think, and we could talk about resolutions and laws and things like that, but we've been able to keep, so many people in their houses. I think it's like 20 to 30 people in houses over since from 2010 to today. And, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of problems we've been able to fix, whether big problems or large problems, or help people navigate them. And sometimes it's just us sitting there and letting people cry. Mm-hmm. I think those are some of my best accomplishments. And I'll say that some of the biggest failures is when we can't help someone. There are people who I know who we weren't able to help with for a variety of reasons, and sometimes it's structural. Those live with me far longer than any legislative accomplishment. It'll probably be sitting there on my heart when I pass away, right? But seeing someone who you mentored, seeing somebody who you helped, who stopped you along the way. I have 3 young interns. In fact, I saw their mom this weekend, and she said, "Well, one's in law school, and one's doing this, and one's doing that, and one's your fraternity brother." And seeing that kind of stuff, I have a number of interns who have gone on to law school. One's about to start working for the Philadelphia DA's office this summer. We have people whose voices were brought to the legislature. We were able to pass a bill about protecting hairstyles and religious garments. And some people were told that they couldn't wear their cross, or they couldn't wear their hijab, or they couldn't wear their hair in braids. Like, that was something that people didn't understand. We created a maternal mortality task force to bring the stories of women who are going through childbirth, whether it's in the first 3 trimesters or the 4th trimester. We bring their stories to the forefront. We brought all the major medical systems together and nonprofits to have these real discussions. We've put out a report. We're about to finish our 2nd report on that. we were able to bring testing into communities. We were able to bring vaccines into the community, varied vaccines. We've had a number of events. We've given thousands of toys out to kids. We've delivered food to our essential services. So many things that we were able to do, but I can't do it unless people talk. And the number one thing I enjoy doing is answering my own phone at the office.
Well, I mean, I think that in order to truly represent your constituency, you need to listen, right? So, and you're a great listener. So those are one of the skills that I think you have that, is one of your strongest skills. So how do folks get in touch with you? How do they find out about initiatives that are going on? What's your social media presence? What's, your website, et cetera?
So website would be jasonrichberg.com. And social media would be my legislative, Suffolk County Legislator Jason Richberg, or Jason Richberg on Instagram, and on, I think we're still on X. I got to remember if we're still on X. Mm-hmm. But, call the office, 631-854-1111. But the most important thing is, if you see me, and I know folks do it already, stop, have a conversation. Tell me what's going on. And it doesn't matter whether you live in the 15th Legislative District or not, because more than likely, you're not the only person going through that issue. You're not the only person who's having a problem. And maybe we could figure out a way together to map it out.
Are there any events upcoming, say in April, May, June, that you support, that you collaborate on, or that you are a big champion of, that you would like our audience, our listeners?
So on April 12th, we are co-sponsoring an Easter egg hunt at the Wyandanch Plaza. There's also going to be this summer, we're going to have a concert series. Maybe some familiar faces you'll see performing. But we're going to have, I know in August, there's going to be an Earth, Wind, and Fire cover band coming up. We're going to have some salsa in the plaza. There's a whole concert schedule that we're putting out with Impact and the Wyandanch Plaza Association and some other community partners. But, we're open to everything. Toy drives. We're actually going to be doing a coat drive coming up. And Youth Week is the third week in May. And so we're going to do a prom dress and tuxedo drive for kids. That's going to be our major thing. We have County Youth Awards that week, and we're going to have a county youth job fair for Youth Week. And so what's important about that job fair, it's going to be at the IBEW Hall right here in Hauppauge. And so that's for young people to get jobs at summer camps, maybe career advice in unions if they want to work with the Board of Elections or any of those other opportunities. I think we had about 150 employers, and we had 700 people come to that youth job fair last year. And so we want to expand that, and not only do we want to get kids jobs, but we want to get them career experience and mentoring.
Are there any opportunities to volunteer that you could talk to our podcast?
So we take interns all the time in our office. So we take interns. We've had anybody who's needs honor society credits, anybody who needs just volunteering as well. Or you could join our youth caucus as well. It meets on Tuesday nights, the second and fourth Tuesday of the month. In our district office, but you can reach out to our office at 631-854-1111 if you want to join the youth caucus. If you want to be an intern, we have high school interns, we have master's level interns, and what we like about our interns is we learn from our interns, and that's the other part that's really important, because when you have an intern, you get to see the world from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. And then we get them to figure out how they could find their own voice, wherever that voice is.
Where is your office located?
Sorry, my office is located at 44 Station Drive in Wyandanch, New York, in the Wyandanch Plaza.
Okay. And as far as donations are concerned, I know that you were accepting donations of suits and things of that nature, right, in the past. Are there any upcoming donation drives that you're a part of?
So we're going to be doing after we do our tuxedo and prom dress drive, we're going to do a business attire drive. So suits, shirts, ties, dress shoes, heels, dresses, things for anything that folks want to do for business, anything that people need for an interview or what have you. We're going to take those donations and we're going to bring them to the Department of Labor. They have a career couture closet, which is basically like a big store for free, where if you need clothes, if you know somebody who's going for an interview, they can go there and go pick out an outfit.
And that would be
after towards the end of May. End of May
time?
End of May. Beginning of May is going to be prom dress and tuxedos.
And it's not just men, correct?
Not just men.
Okay, all right. So.
And I will just say, if you got shoes, dry clean the clothes preferably beforehand. If you got shoes, women's heels are really important. Men's dress shoes are really important.
Right. Okay. Okay. So, as far as what do you see in the future, say in the next 12 months, what are you aspiring to accomplish in your role as a legislator?
Continue being a voice for the voiceless.
Okay.
I think I learned a long time ago, you can't put your vision out there like that because it's not my vision. My seat is about the people's seat, right? What do the people need? When I got elected, I had this idea of economic development and economic improvement. I got elected in the middle of and then we went to a COVID shutdown, right? So my vision is not as important as the environment.
Okay. And I guess at this point, I always ask my guests to talk to our audience, and I want you to look into that camera and give them some of your words of wisdom of how they can overcome challenges, or what would be your advice to them to make this world a better place in similar fashion to what you've done in your life.
And I saw this video a couple of weeks ago, and I should have sent this to you. And it's his grandfather, I think it's a grandfather talking to his granddaughter, and he said it's easier to pull people down than it is to pull them up.
Right.
But our goal in life should be to pull everybody up. We shouldn't be pulling people down. And so how do we speak life into people is by doing the work itself, right? Stepping outside of yourself, stepping outside of your own wants and needs, and realizing that there's a bigger world, there's a bigger universe. It's not about our own selfish goals and intents. It's about focusing on people and bringing people to the table, bringing conversations to the table, and realizing that you're upset and somebody else is upset too. You never know what somebody else is going through. So figure out ways to lift people up, not pull them down.
Awesome words to live by, and we thank you for that wisdom that you've imparted to us today. And we thank you for the service that you provide to our communities, to all of us, including me. You inspire me and you uplift me in how you act and what you represent and how you represent each and every one of us. And you're much appreciated. I tell you today that you are officially part of our champion circle. You are part of our chosen family. And I thank you for unifying so many different people, for uplifting so many, and for making a difference in this world that we live in.
Well, thank you for bringing other people's voices to the table. I think that's what's important about the Champion Circle.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So on behalf of the Champion Circle, on behalf of Liga de Justicia Abogados, Liga de Justicia Foundation, my amazing support team, all of our production staff, and everyone of our viewers, and all of the people who hit like and share and listen to these amazing stories like Jason Richberg and others, we thank you for following us, and we ask you to stay tuned for greater stories and for a lot of amazing people. Take care.